We're on mic and recording.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the work session for the Frisco Town Council. Can you call the roll call, please?
Aronson.
Here.
Burley. Here. Held.
Yes.
Palenko. Absent. Incan.
Here.
Mortensen.
Here.
Skrupczak, Adrian. Here.
Thank you. First up this afternoon is our work session agenda item number 1, and this is the proposed amendments to the Unified Development Code for Affordable Housing Incentives. Open it up, Don. Let's have a
And
good conversation.
Yeah, if it works for
Works.
council, I'm gonna sit here and just throw the code up on the screen if I can do a screen share. All right, great. Y'all can see that and great, excellent. Let me get that on there. There we go. So it should be pretty visible. Everybody can see that. Great. The purpose of this, as you know, we've been talking for a number of years, well, actually several months, about potential changes to our code that could facilitate workforce housing, whether it's town developments or private developers that are looking to do workforce housing. It's taken a few different forms. We've talked about a workforce housing overlay, which could allow variations from our current existing code in various zone districts, which could enhance it or increase the number of units that could be developed, as well as maybe make them a little bit more affordable to develop. There's also been a number of discussions regarding a density bonus. This was last discussed by town council back in September, as far as potential changes to the density bonus provisions, which could encourage either a LIHTC project or additional units to be developed, depending on the project type. The last time we discussed this back in September, we talked about the density bonus. LIHTC was the LIHTC density bonus was pretty strongly supported. However, there was some concerns about the changes the AMI requirement on some of the other density bonus units. So that has not proceeded, as we're continuing to work with developers on that. With that said, we have had recent proposal from a developer who is looking at a project in town, and they have taken some time to craft and identify some specific code changes that would assist their project. As from the staff perspective, we took a look at that and said, okay, while that developer may certainly be very desirable for that one developer, if this is a code change, it needs to be applicable to all projects in a particular zone district or multiple zone districts in order for it to really be appropriate. Otherwise, the developers of this project should just go the PUD route and focus on their one specific property. That said, because we have been looking at this workforce housing overlay, we took the opportunity to try to incorporate some of those ideas into some of the ideas that the town staff had been looking at in order to come up with a comprehensive set of potential amendments. So with that, I'm going to jump right in unless you have any questions on where we came from with that. All right, so rolling along, you've seen this first section before. This is the density bonus section. And so what we would be adding is a provision here to allow density bonus to apply to a LIHTC project. As you may recall from our discussion in September, a LIHTC program cannot have occupancy related to location of your work. It's only based on AMI. Our current deed restriction requires and density requires that you be employed within the town of Frisco, or depending on the deed restriction in 10 Mile Basin or Summit County. Cannot have that in LIHTC, so we crafted this additional language here to address that particular situation. Again, council was supportive of this back in September when we last discussed it. Unless there's any questions, I'll move on from there. And I'm hoping this is, if you have a question as I'm going through it, just shout it out, and that way exactly. So please just shout out. I'd rather not talk for the next hour and a half nonstop. So good. All right. So moving along. So again, this is all density bonus, some minor tweaks to the definitions, as well as adding a workforce housing definition. It's not necessarily required now at this time, but it is already in our code in the water code section. So we use this definition as it relates to the housing helps program. So we felt it appropriate to go ahead and add that at this point in time as well. Moving along. So this is the new section. The the initial thought as we started talking about this, I think back in March, was to do a workforce housing overlay. And that would be just similar to the historic overlay or some of the other overlays in our current town code. After thinking about that a little bit longer, and discussing it with the developer, the recent developer, there was some discussion there was some concern from the developer standpoint that, you know what, that is a discretionary process, an overlay. It's a rezoning of a specific thing under certain conditions. And there is some give and take on that. And the developer's goal with this, and I think from the perspective of town staff, as we're trying to incentivize and really encourage workforce housing to be developed, it should be a clear set of criteria that says, if you do X, you can do Y, and that will give some certainty to the developer in order to allow them to be able to confidently say, yes, this is a project that can move forward. I'm going to go ahead and make the purchase and start going down that road of design and whatever else. If it has to go through planning commission and then town council to say, yeah, no, we're going to have to change this and this and this and this, that adds time to the project as well as cost, and time is money. So that's, again, the idea here is to create something that's very specific that says, if you do X, you can do Y. And we'll go through this. So all of this would be an entire new section of the code itself. As it's drafted, it would be the Affordable Housing Development Program. It would be applicable in the Gateway, Central Core, mixed use, and then the high, medium, and low residential zone districts. We're looking at a couple of other zone districts where it could work, such as the commercial oriented zone district. However, right now at this point in time, residential is not a permitted use in the commercial oriented zone district. So that's like the strip of where Safeway and Walmart are. I think long-term, I think it would make sense as those redevelop that there could be some second floor residential and things like that, like we have in the downtown. However, as that is not currently part of the code, it would take a little bit more time and more thought in order to develop what would be appropriate for residential in those areas. So we left the commercial oriented zone district out as an applicable area for this.
Both sides of Simba Boulevard.
It is on both sides. There's also some light industrial in there on the east side of the highway. And there's a couple PUDs as well.
A while ago, we granted the rezoning of the 2 office spaces above the Conoco Wendy's to be apartments.
Correct.
So there's precedent to have the house residential within that.
That's correct. And I think, and our current code will allow accessory dwelling units in the commercial oriented zone district. The difference being they cannot be sold separately. They're with that property. They cannot be sold separately. They're only there for employees and for rent, which again is great, but there might be opportunities for additional workforce housing units out there.
I apologize. I sent you an ESP message, but I doubt you got it.
Well, give me a second.
A map showing you say in here that you're allowing increased density in certain zones where it didn't previously exist. Map that shows what those areas are that were really making a difference to those neighborhoods more than the others.
Yeah, it's actually the town zoning map, and I'm sure if maybe Stacy or Veronica could go to our town website and pull it up. If not, I can grab a copy from the website and bring it on down. Either way, yeah, absolutely. So, or Susan may be able to as well. So, yeah, so we can get that and show that and point those out. Good question though. So then application for this, again, anybody could apply for it. This is some just standard stuff that we have. So that way, again, it's spelling out a process on how some of these things work. If we're welcome to go into detail in this, or it's kind of standard for a lot of our applications. Criteria. So here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. As we were looking at this, tried to come up with what might be appropriate. So first of all, as you can see here, at least half of the dwelling units within the development would be deed restricted as permanently affordable. So that means it's our standard deed restriction with AMI and occupancy limitations. Unless it's a LIHTC, then the occupancy limitations would not apply. The difference though, from our current deed restriction is 100% AMI. New legislation that was passed in 2022 allowed an increase in those to 140 and 120% AMI for sale and rental respectively. So we're reflecting that in this document. Okay, moving on. So the next one is, again, the deed restriction will be required as part of the application, identifying terms. We have a standard deed restriction that could be utilized. If the developer or applicant wanted to propose something else, they'd have to submit that at the time of the application. That might cause, again, a little bit more time for our town attorney to review it, negotiate those terms, whatever else. But there is that opportunity there. And then finally, in the CC, so central core, mixed use and gateway zone districts. Those are typically commercial or mixed use zone districts that have a commercial use requirement. So that would have to be defined as part of the application as well. And then identifying what incentives and what allowances from town code would be applied. So that's the basic criteria as far as an application itself.
Why the distinction between 140 and 120 for rentals?
I was not involved with the crafting of the legislation at the state level. I presume that it's some qualification things as far as income qualifications, what you actually make, but I do not have a great answer for that.
That's
You
mirroring.
mean why the difference in 120 to 140, or the increase was to allow for areas like ours that have skewed AMI to qualify for some of these programs at the state level. And I think you're just making this reflect that.
It does reflect the state legislation. I think Andy's question was why 140 for sale and 120 for rental.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't have a great answer for that.
But that mirrors the state, right?
That does mirror the state legislation. Okay. All right, incentives. All right, so basic zoning incentives here, and again, this is where it gets into the details, which is the challenging and important, and how do you visualize this as well? Rick?
Don, before we switch into the incentive, shift to review, I read this as you were going through it and not seeing how, if it's a LIHTC property, how would we not? I understand we can't have the work designation. But what else? So it's only AMI. So someone meeting that AMI from anywhere in the country can come in and qualify for these projects.
Correct. I mean, presumably they'd have to have an income that meets those levels in order to qualify under that. So, and to do so, you probably have to work somewhat locally. It would open it up potentially to whatever internet workers or remote workers or some other things that were in that specific price range. So that is certainly a challenge. It is, but that is a LIHTC program as well.
Sure, I know
So-
we can't get it. I'm just making sure everyone's.
That's for sure. They're probably already here.
They're working a remote call center job.
Mhm.
Yeah.
By way of example.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Time, we had this question in Summit County, Utah as well, and well above 95% of the LIHTC projects were filled or certain stuff was filled by locals. So I'm sure we could look up that experience here too, because there's other LIHTC projects.
Yeah, and I similar to what Tom just said, that was the feedback I've heard from the Wintergreen project as well as the Pinewood project in Breckenridge. So I suspect certainly there could be some folks that move here with their or whatever, their tech job, their remote job, but they still have to meet those AMI requirements, and there will be a few of those.
I guess I'm along this line, what about like, is how, I guess like say you build a project and you get like 200 applications and there's 100 spaces for living.
Mhm.
How will those like who's in charge of that process?
We haven't developed that yet, but what I can say is with our other projects, we do a lottery. So if and Smith Ranch and Silverthorne just did something very similar, they had brought a whole bunch of units online. They had a lottery they had pre-qualifications. Then they held the lottery and said, okay, You get it? I don't think I don't know whether you could do this with the LIHTC, but there have been programs set up where, okay, if you've proven that you work in Summit County or in Frisco for X number of years, you get extra balls in the hopper, so to speak. But I do not know whether you can do that with a LIHTC project.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess overall, if there was a way to give a local preference, just out, starting it, you know.
Yeah, I don't know whether you can do that with LIHTC. It might even be a first come, first serve deal. When Neil is here, he could probably give you a little bit more of an idea on that when we get some question and answer with the developer.
And then just one other thing before incentives, the maximums being 140 and 120, not remotely hindering us from, going lower.
No.
with Our AMI in order to be able to.
No, and in fact, to qualify as LIHTC, it would have to have that lower percentage in there. Every under 60, I think, actually. So yeah, and we can have some more of that discussion on what the specifics are, that whether it's a 4% or a 9% LIHTC, it gets into some variability there.
So, sorry, just so I'm clear, like, I'm thinking of peak one, because we've had it forever, and there are AMIs there that are higher than 140, right? So this is just enhancing the program and making more incentives for affordable housing. It's not limiting, like, all of a sudden in saying 120 for rental, 140 for ownership, that's not limiting a future peak one from happening too at the middle to upper AMI.
Yeah, I mean, so
And I guess, is that restricting us from what we have today? Or is it?
this is actually probably, yeah, it expands on what we have today. Right now, under the density bonus program, you're limited to a maximum of 100% AMI to qualify for density bonus. Peak ones, you
Still a density bonus.
we're
I was thinking about.
well, and also the incentives. So peak one, it's a little bit different too. And I think I'd have to go back, but I believe when that was developed, it ended up being an average of 110% AMI across the units, if I recall correctly. So there are opportunities, and that was a little bit different too, because that was a town partnership with the developer. They came up with this specific development agreement and created a whole new zoning specifically for that. So the density bonus didn't apply, neither did this incentive. Rick?
And then, because of some of the projects that we've talked about,
Mhm.
right? The 160 had come up in that particular, if they go through the PUD process, that's how they can attain that number.
Yeah, and any property could apply for a PUD. The challenge with the PUD is you don't have the certainty involved with that. And even in a PUD, if you're applying a density bonus, you have to comply with the affordable provision or the affordable housing provisions in the code. So you'd still be under that 100% AMI or 100% average AMI. It would give you maybe potentially some other things in there. So again, it's not necessarily the best route, and that's where to achieve workforce housing. Okay. All right. So incentives. So the first one is zoning and talking about specific zoning and density requirements, because that's probably the biggest incentive that you can have in a development is increasing density. Started off with proposal and again, gateway, commercial core and mixed use zone districts. So you can use the density bonus, get as many units as you can onto the property. And as an example, with the Granite Park project, the base density is 9 units of density. We got 22 through utilization of the density bonus provisions, not using any of these other incentives, including parking. So that increased the density on there by over 100% of what could be permitted. So that is still a permitted, and that's how you'd apply and get additional density in those 3 zone districts. In the residential zone districts, looked at it a little bit differently. A concern, particularly in the residential low and the residential medium zone districts that we've heard as we've been going through, is just the sheer bulk and mass of some of these projects in what was intended to be a low density zone district. So for that reason, we're recommending putting a limitation on the amount of density that could be added for one of these 2 types of projects, and broke them down into 2 different types. One is 100% affordable, so all of the units would be deed restricted, or a 50% where half of the units would be deed restricted. Excuse me. So again, in there, 100% increase in zoning density would be allowed if you have 100% affordable project, 50% increase in density if you have a 50% deed restricted project. So as an example of that, if you had a 1 acre lot in an RL zone district, you could go from 8 units of density up to 12. Sure.
12 should be 12 units turns into 18.
Yes, I have a typo. Thank you. I'm gonna make note of my typo.
I just want to make sure.
Yep, that was higher math. Note real quick.
By the error. Wait, what are you, you're talking about the
In
50%?
number 3 there,
Number 3.
it says 12 to 16 and it should be 12 to 18. Yeah, that's not a good example, apparently. Thank you. Thank you for catching that.
I think on this one, what? So this is probably a math question, so I apologize, but the 3 town lots equates to how much?
3 town lots is just under a 1/4 acre, because it's each town lot is 3,500 square feet. So 3 of those is 10,500 square feet.
So applying this to 3 town lots, which is like,
Mhm.
I think the majority of at least the south side of town is.
Mhm.
What would that open up density wise in RL?
Under our current, well, so right now, so in RL, if you have a single town lot, it's 4 units per acre, I'm sorry, 8 units per acre. So you could put 2 units on that existing town lot. So you could put 3 with this incentive. If you had an acre, that's where you go from 8 to 12. Trying to find a balance between the context and the neighborhood.
Well, I think that's just more, I think what the majority of the south side of town is
Mhm.
3 town lots.
Mhm.
So I think that gives better perspective versus the acre, which there aren't very many.
Is it a town lot from one street to the next or half of
alleyway-
that?
Half of that alleyway to. They're long and.
Street, yeah, they're each by 25 by 140 from the original town plat.
And it's about 200 from street to street.
Street to street, it's actually 280 plus 40 feet, which is the alley, so it's 320 street to street. Math, I think.
So anybody with a single family house over there could expect their neighbor to build 2 units or 3 units?
3, up to 3 if they use this incentive. And I will also say that under the current zoning as and the development code as it stands today, any single family residence in the RL zone district or RM or RH could do an affordable or an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, as long as it's deed restricted and could not be sold separately. So the difference between this is those 3 units could all be sold separately. And they could all have potentially have an ADU as well.
In addition to the 3, they can have ADUs. So now
Yep.
we're at 6.
Because they're not being sold separately. Under our code, an ADU that is deed restricted does not count towards the density cap.
So the one house now could turn into 6. 6 residential units.
6 dwelling units, yes, potentially. 3 individual ownership units, though.
For me.
Can't do it in the reserve, though. So. All right, so any other questions on the density part of that? Does that 50%, do these increases seem like the right amount, thinking about context of the neighborhoods?
How do you want to go about discussing each one of these numbered items in particular? You want to go through the whole thing and then kind of come back and have the bigger conversation around the whole kind of list?
I think it would be, I'd like to see it holistically, but
On rolling through then. All right.
Everybody good with that?
Lot coverage, similar, with the larger of a footprint that you can have, the more units that you can get in there. Most of our zone districts do have some lot coverage limitation that has a maximum percentage of the lot that can be covered by impervious surfaces such as houses and driveways and patios and things like that. So under this proposal, you could have an increase of up to 20% of that lot coverage if you went to a 100% deed restricted project. And 10% increase if you did a 50% deed restricted project. Okay. Rolling along setbacks, again, similar. If you're increasing lot coverage, you're probably having to adjust setbacks and encroach on those setbacks in order to accomplish that. So this would allow some increase in the reduction in the setbacks. So a reduction in smaller lots. So you're, rather than building 5 feet away from the lot line, you could build 3 feet from the lot line, as an example.
Central core, is there?
No, because central core, well, actually, there are some very minor changes. That's on the off main side, there would be a change to allow a reduction there. So the off main is between the alley and Granite and the alley and Galena. Maximum building height. Again, this is, if you're going to increase the units, one way to do that is to go a little bit higher. And there's a lot of discussion about that. How do you get another floor, for example, in there? We have our community plan has a lot of guiding principles. We want to retain the view sheds. We want to make it so we don't feel like we have caverns of houses along our alleys and things like that. So thinking about that, what is the balance? And sometimes just a couple of feet can make that difference. And so rather than doing a dramatic increase of 10 feet or something like that, the proposal is to do a 10% increase. So that would be a 4-foot increase if it was a 40-foot zoning limitation, such as in the Central Core District. So.
Does that do anything?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not an architect. It does. Okay, I'm looking at these guys. It does.
Heads vigorously, I suspect. So.
Why is that? So can somebody maybe illustrate that for me?
Basically what it does.
Oh, you'll have to come up here, actually.
Andy?
Thanks, Andy. Andy Spiel. What it does is it allows us to bury the roof a little bit more. It's not going to give us a whole other floor, but it lets you get a little bit more roof variety and stepping and articulation into that if you need it. It does help a little bit as we're trying to get in there. We do find that we've come up against that height limit with some of the projects of this scope. Again, it's not going to get us another floor, but it allows a little bit more variety in the roof forms.
4 feet. That's not-
Doesn't seem like much.
Like a taller ceiling, I would want that once.
Penthouse. Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna have to maybe come to you and ask this question, but, with some of the new buildings that we have that are like almost completed around Frisco. The, like on Third down there, like the flat roof, is that because they build all the way up and then there's stuff with a flat roof, or like when you talk about variations? I don't know, I was just, I just noticed a lot of the new buildings kind of have that flat look, and I don't know, this is just like an aesthetics question, I guess, but.
Yeah, I think, well, there's 2 different height limits in most of the zones. One's for the flat roofs and one for a pitched roof. So both of those, I think would go up by the 10%. So it does allow for a little bit more. Again, you're not going to get a 4th floor in a lot of these buildings, but it does allow you to potentially also increase some floor to floor heights. You can build a little less expensively with certain types of floor structure if you can get the floor structure a little taller. So it gives you some other options in terms of building affordably.
height is always one of those big things. I mean, you talk about increasing height or a variation in height, and a lot of times that's what gets neighbors up in arms more than anything else. And so it is something, as Andy pointed out, that can be beneficial in a development. And a 10%, it sounds like a lot, but when you think about it and it's 4 feet, it really may not be that big of an impact on the neighborhood.
That was like 3 meetings worth of discussion, but now it's just to essentially get elevator equipment in, and that was all we needed to do, but yeah, I mean, that was
That's Main Street.
That's Main Street, and that was, yeah. And it's just in,
Adjacent to the other giant building, that's right there.
yeah. But I think like, you know, in hindsight, it was just 3 feet or so. It was pretty.
All right, so that's height. There's also a proposal by the developer. So we do have a requirement in the central core and mixed use zone district that the first floor height is a minimum of 10 feet. And again, that's to try to create a certain aesthetic and walk as you're walking along, makes it feel a little bit more of a pedestrian scale in there. The proposal is to reduce that to minimum ceiling height of 9 feet in the central core and mixed use zone district. And again, for the same reasons that Andy just pointed out, as far as the constructability and floor to floor heights and getting everything that you want to in that one envelope. All right, summary of everything is here. So this is the summary of the incentives. Yes, Rick.
Just a clarifying question, because like it's for visual, I got her pulled up. The lot. The lot that's currently under construction at Second and Frisco.
Uh-huh.
Right there.
Yeah.
Between Frisco and the alley.
Uh-huh.
That is one town lot.
No, that is, and first of all, that's zoned RH. And I think if I recall correctly, that was 4 town lots. Because it was,
Just making, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't seem like that was adding up.
yeah, because that is, I think that overall lot was about 100 by 140,
It was
if
a
I
big
recall.
one, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Campbell project.
Mhm. There's 2 of them in that block that are
Yeah.
going. They're similar in scale and scope and density on those. Okay, moving on to the next step in development standards. And so the developer of that had requested some of these modifications and I had a number of discussions about this. Over the years, the town has incorporated a number of pretty stringent development standards into our town code. Primarily for aesthetic purposes. There's a lot of goals that we want to meet in our community plan and have been borne out by the community during community meetings. We don't want big, blocky, bulky, simple, plain buildings. Well, there's a cost to that as well. That increases cost of construction. We've seen it very clearly on our own workforce housing project, which we did meet all of these standards, by the way. So yes, there is a reason that we have these standards. We recognize it costs more to do so. Where is the balance in that? And so there was a lot of back and forth on this in order to try to come to some sort of agreement on a proposal that could be considered. So with that, run through a couple of these. Yes.
The back and forth between and among.
It was between myself and the development team, which you see here. Okay, so starting off in some basics, it's reducing the landscaping requirements. Well, if you have an increased lot coverage, there's less room for landscaping, so there is some logic to that. Whether or not these are the way it's written, it is going to be up to the planning commission to determine whether or not this actually makes some sense, as if the reduction in the landscaping is meets the intent of the code as far as what making sure that it's not just a bare lot with irrigated grass around it. So there is going to be some discussion and consideration by the planning commission, at least as written. And again, this is one of those things that's probably a little bit difficult to just define as far as what the reduction should be, because it is going to be a variable on a case by case basis.
Just to clarify, this is maybe with input from this particular development team, but this has been a long time coming. We've got a lot of people that have been asking for these same exact things, and that's why it goes beyond just approaching something to the developer. But the key here is that we're talking the higher amount of workforce housing. I think that then the next steps are gonna end up being.
It sounds like this has been, since it's gone to paper, concept has been discussed throughout the community, but since it's gone to paper meaning screen. The conversations have strictly there's been no community input, there's been no
Correct.
outreach.
This is the kickoff.
Other developments
Correct.
To say this is good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, this is essentially the kickoff to a code amendment process. And a code amendment can be proposed by a developer without any input from staff. They could just draft it up and drop it and say, here you go. This is a little bit better. And again, while the developer has these goals, the town has had these goals for a little bit while as well. So there was an opportunity to craft something that could meet both goals of both. And that's kind of the approach we're taking.
Fine, like I said, my question was a
Mhm.
process. question.
Yeah, and overall,
Involved so far.
and that's a great point. The process itself, code amendment process will start off with a work session of town council, which is where we are this evening. And then the next step after council gives direction this evening, hopefully, to proceed, we'll take it to the planning commission for a public comment. And that's hopefully where we'll get a lot of feedback from the public on what they think about these code amendments. Excuse me, once the planning commission, they will give a recommendation back to town council. If it's essentially what was discussed at this work session, does not necessarily need to come back for a town council work session, although it could. If there's changes, it would definitely come back for another work session and then go to a first and second reading of the ordinance, unless council wanted to go back to planning commission for further discussion. So it could take as many iterations as necessary on that. I did today share this with another developer that has been contemplating development and potential code changes as well. So we will start gaining additional information on this and input on this. All right, moving on. Mixes of use. So in the mixed use zone district, we have a requirement of minimum of 20% mix of uses. If you go below that, whether it's to, let's say, 10% commercial and 90% residential, that would require a conditional use permit, which is considered by the planning commission as you're going through the site plan approval process. In this particular instance, the developer has requested that there be a decrease, potentially no commercial usage on there. From staff perspective, feel very, very strongly that the commercial component should stay, and there still should be that requirement to go through a conditional use process if you're going less than a specified mix of use. Same time, again, the developer has requested that council and planning commission consider a written 100%, if it's 100% affordable development, dropping that to 10% commercial minimum requirement, and the opportunity to go lower if you go through the conditional use process. Similar with 50% affordable development, it would be a 15% commercial as proposed. So we can move on to that, or if you want to think about that one for a little bit, and we can come back to that.
I'm just double checking. I just brought up the zoning map. Mixed use is it's kind of a scattered, that's just kind of filling in a lot of little pieces around the town, right? It's not
Yeah.
consolidated.
I mean, examples of mixed use would be like the water tower vacant lot there. The B1 lot, I think, is a mixed use zone district. Anything west of here on Main Street is mixed use, going all the way out to 203 Public Works. Yeah, so, or actually Centura is mixed
Oh,
use.
you're right.
That was recently rezoned to mixed use as part of that property. So there is mixed use scattered throughout town. All right, next up, let's see, residential development standards. Again, here, there is the more design variation you have, the more design requirements you have with materials and things like that, the more it is going to cost you to build. And that's just, I mean, that's the way it is. But again, there's very specific community goals that led to the development of these residential development standards. The current development standards require that building articulation. So that's how a building breaks up. So it doesn't look like a big massive wall. How that is demonstrated. We have seven different criteria and the development has to should meet 4 of those criteria under our current standards. The developer has proposed dropping that to 2. And I can pull them out and talk about what those are, but it's roof lines and pitches and some other things in order, and variation materials and some other things in order to break up those facades. As we're looking at these, and I had this conversation with the developer too, we as staff, so a couple of things. First of all, we are very obviously in a housing crisis at the moment. We have challenges meeting employee housing needs. And that has really been building over the past couple of years. At the same time, anything that's built under these standards, it's going to be there for 50, 60, our lifetimes at least. So trying to find a balance of meeting the need of today, as well as the longer term vision of what we want our community to look at, and finding that balance. Discussion with the developer that I had was, I would hate for somebody to drive down Main Street and say, oh, there's the affordable housing project, because we dumbed down the standards to that point. And so finding a balance with that is really something that's, I think, what we're trying to meet with these proposed standards. So bulk plane is the next one. And bulk plane, if you're not familiar with that, we have an envelope that's created by the height of it, the height that's allowed in a zone district, the setbacks, and an angle that rises up from there from a certain point to create this envelope. So you don't have a big box appearance, but you do have something that looks like it steps back and it fits in, and you don't have something very massive. That's the intent of the bulk plane. The current requirement is that there's no more than 350 cubic feet of bulk plane encroachments that could be permitted on any given project, regardless of the size of the project and the size of the property. So with that, the developer initially proposed that bulk plane encroachments would not apply.
Can I ask?
Yes.
And if anybody else doesn't feel this way, Jane. We're not being asked to create a code change for a developer. We're being asked to create a code change for the town of Frisco.
Correct.
This-
Developer
in
proposed
no way
it.
disrespect to the one project,
Mhm.
maybe 2 that have been proposed by this particular developer.
Mhm.
But I don't want to give that comment more weight than it deserves. So I'd rather we really change the focus to this developer wants this, that, or the other, to the town of Frisco needs or should do this, that, or the other. We can talk about the developer and that project later. But this is a town of Frisco project.
With one clarification, I will say that the developer has proposed certain code amendments. And as staff, we are working through those. And so it would not be, I don't think it would be accurate to say the town staff is proposing this. This is,
Some way or another, of
Yeah,
just sort of respecting the fact that whatever it is we're talking about here is not development specific, it's Frisco or zoning specific.
that is absolutely true. This will apply to equally to all properties in all zone districts that this is applicable to. So yes, that is a very good point. And we should stress that repeatedly. And that's why, again, if the developer or if a developer wanted something that's different than the code and the town doesn't support a particular set of code amendments that the developer would like to follow, then the developer should follow a different process, namely the PUD.
Or I want this to be a smart proposal for every lot in the town.
Well,
not one lot in the town.
This is a proposal. If this gets adopted, it would apply to all properties in all zone districts. But to be clear, it was generated. A bit of this conversation was started by a particular developer, so.
And
We
a smart,
actually
and a
asked
smart
for that.
developer who.
We asked for that input at a meeting too, and said, come back to us.
Mhm.
What you would say.
Yep.
I mean, we asked for that.
So,
So
well, that's up to council, so. Do you want to get through this and then maybe open up discussion? Okay. All right, so again, there are potential additional bulk plan encroachments that could be permitted under this set of proposed code amendments. As an example, and again, because right now it's 350 cubic feet total, no matter the size of the property. Staff is suggesting that maybe it be a 500 cubic feet per 10,000 square feet of lot area. So a larger lot area could have larger bulk plan encroachments. At the same time, that just thinking about that, would that make the building feel a lot more bulky? Possibly. So it's something that looking for feedback and thought about this. Some very minor modifications also to the bulk plan envelope. And this is a very specific odd case in the West Main area in the mixed use zone district. It specifies that the bulk plan is measured at a 22% angle rather than a 45% angle. Everywhere else in town, it's a 45% angle. Not entirely certain why that came to be. However, at this particular point, recommending a change to that to be 45. Mixed use only on West Main. It is very odd. There's probably some reason back that it was set up that way. Same time, it's very strange because West Main has a very wide right of way out there as well. So the canyon effect that a lot of this bulk plan stuff is trying to do is less in that area. So it's odd that there's this 22-degree angle out there. I haven't been able to tease out in the code why it was inserted there or when. All right, moving on. I'm sure nobody really is interested in this next section, parking. But we've, as you all know, we have been talking about parking and the impacts of parking on workforce housing and workforce housing development for quite some time. When we were first working on Granite Park, that was a big discussion, and the town's architect said we could fit more units on this if we followed X parking code. The problem is most of these places that have these significantly reduced parking code requirements, they have something called transit that's effective, and you have more than one way other than a car to get from A to B. The town, Summit County, we are working on that, continue to work on that. But I think if, as anybody who's tried to depend on the Summit Daily to do your daily tasks, or I'm sorry, not the Summit Daily, the Summit Stage, that was a slip of the tongue, but the Summit Stage to do a daily task, such as going to the grocery store or anything like that, you have to time it very, very efficiently. You really have to plan your day and plan it well. Otherwise, it's not very effective or efficient. So we need our cars at this point in time until we have better transit. So that said, we are also planning for what will be here in 50 years. And so is there a way to balance that of our current systems and our future desires? And to do that, we've taken a close look at that and come up with a potential solution or a series of potential solutions. Some of this will require significant, because it's a huge policy shift. Item 2 here talks about on-street overnight parking. As you probably recall, we have talked about that on a couple of occasions, and there's been quite a bit of discussion, snow removal, some other things that are challenging with on-street overnight parking. So with that there will take it will require a larger policy discussion and make potentially a shift in operational things for some of our departments in order to accommodate some of these things. So this is a starting point on this. Just want to put it out there. But if we are going to achieve reduced parking, there needs to be other opportunities for parking, at least in the near future.
When you say it's the starting point, do you feel as if you put the starting point at the most of one end? Meaning, did you reject even less parking as
Yes.
the requirement, or you kind of put this as the least amount of parking that anybody could ever imagine, and our starting point is, okay, how much more do we really want to let happen? You said it's our starting point, but where in the spectrum are we as our starting point?
So right now, our starting point is one parking space per bedroom. In a market rate development, that's one parking space per bedroom up to 4 bedrooms. In a workforce housing, there's already a reduction that's in there, and it's one parking space per bedroom up to 2 bedrooms. So a 4-bedroom workforce housing unit could be 2 parking spaces. So we already have a reduction for workforce housing. That said, if you look at parking codes from a number of jurisdictions. There are some places that have zero parking requirement if they're in a TOD, transit oriented development, where there's a transit stop right there. That's not what we have here. So we're trying to find something that's in between, that could work for our community and this sort of development where you have, where there's any sort of development in the downtown core or areas where we do have, you're already on the Summit Stage route. Again, it's not ideal, but it could serve some needs where maybe you can have a shared household. You're potentially in walking distance to work. So we did consider certain factors that could make a reduction in parking viable. And it's not going to work for everything. As you recall with Granite Park, our partners from CDOT were adamantly opposed to any parking reduction because there was no way for their current employees to get to work at 3 a.m. other than their own personal vehicles. So there are a number of considerations that we have to continue to go through with that. And
That's a very specific partner in a very specific case.
it is.
So.
It is. I also don't know that it's,
Make policy based on that particular.
I also don't know that it's completely unusual either that people are going to have, because the Summit Stage runs once an hour. That's our only transit option right now. And it's not around the clock.
So in reading this, Don, and to kind of dovetail off what Andrew was saying, the approach has still been a minimum amount per, right? You didn't look at setting a maximum. Meaning you come in anywhere under that, just you can't exceed.
I
And
did-
so have we ever flipped that on its head and looked at maximums in Frisco?
I have not, and I did not as part of this exercise. Okay, let's see here. A couple of unique things that certainly we have not tried here in Frisco before. An allowance for off-site parking. So if you were able to if a developer was able to come to an agreement for permanent off-site parking somewhere, there could be additional parking reduction on that. And then finally, this is a kind of a new one, car sharing service. If a developer were to establish a car sharing service that would be perpetually available to the residents of a development, they could have an additional reduction in parking spaces.
I just don't know what that means.
A car sharing program?
An amenity to the apartment building is a car.
Yeah.
Rented out.
Mhm.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Zip car, but that's a third party.
Yes, but they could bring a
This
third
is
party.
some way or another.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't know what it meant.
Yep, there would be a management program and agreement and say, this is how we're starting it, and it'd be written in that they have to keep that going in somehow or another. So. I don't know how viable it'll be or how many developers would take advantage of
I've
it.
seen it done.
I mean, Andy mentioned Zipcar. I mean,
No, I understand car share.
Yeah.
Have you seen a car sharing amenity tied to an apartment building?
I have not, but as we're doing these, we're trying to think outside the box a little bit and see if there are opportunities to do some things.
It's actually not part of the agreement or requirements. It was an afterthought, but we're looking at doing car share for Alto Verde 1 as well. But there's a state, Frisco, I think, was awarded a similar car share award. But that's not tied to the development like you're talking about, or like this is proposing.
So possible. I think anything's possible and things are only going to get more and I suspect that things are going to go and evolve more and more in that direction over time, but. All right. And then there's some request and opportunity to, again, time is money, increase application fees. This section needs a little bit more work and definition, but again, just the concept, getting the concept out there of if you're able to reduce application fees, waive application fees, reduce application processing timelines while still meeting all notice requirements, that could save developer a little bit of time, and time is money, as we know. This section does need more work. So that's the extent and the summary of all of the potential code amendments to address or potentially provide incentives to workforce housing. Are there more? Sure. are all these appropriate? That's why we're here to find out. So,
Sorry, I have a parking question.
sure.
The. C1, the parking spot per studio bedroom unit, that's nothing changed on that one, right? Like, I guess my question is what in here, can you highlight for us besides adding car share? And the permanent offsite?
So, yeah, actually, this is a change right here because it's one parking space per bedroom for studios and 1 bedrooms and then 1.5 for 2 bedrooms. So that's a reduction by half a car.
So that's even a reduction over what we have for housing.
Correct.
Thank you, and then. That was it. And then you added there was offsite parking. Car share. Is that right? Am I following it?
The transit here as well.
But yeah,
That's the one I'm most uncomfortable.
You don't control it.
Correct.
We have to come up with other transit ideas and possibilities ways for people to get around more than we have today. You know, that's incumbent upon us. But we have to come up with other transit opportunities.
Get people to
micro
register
transit,
or
you know, micro transit is not the only thing, but
yes.
building a parking structure, giving people the ability to park elsewhere, utilizing potential developments for, you know, bonus parking. You know, that is actually gonna potentially happen. That is not in here, but these are things that, you know, we are gonna have to plan for.
And it should be in here. If we're planning for it, put it in. I don't know what we're referring to. But. I don't wanna get too crystal ball-y.
I mean. Whatever it looks like doesn't go in the development code.
Yeah.
That's not where that goes.
Right, I don't know that it goes in here beyond, you know, beyond. And we're not even saying that we're gonna try to build a transit oriented development. But. These are, you know, this is the future, it's the same way that we built Peak One. You know, smaller streets, we're gonna have less cars, blah, 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 but like, here we are 15 years later, or 20 years later, and. You know, haven't made those changes, we have more cars there, because all of the people grew up and kids are now driving and whatnot. And, you know, so this is where, this is what I'm just saying, like, we have to attack this particular, like, if we're gonna make these changes, which we need to do. For other developers as well, we also have to attack a transit plan and come up with options for people. That's on us. That's not part of this. Right?
I look at Peak One as the reason to be scared of this. I'm sure I wasn't there. I don't know if you were on council then, but predates everybody in this room probably.
We have a point at Peak One as being a parking problem, but as soon as the HOA started enforcing it, things have been relatively fine. And there's been plenty of families that have gotten rid of cars because they don't need them and they can walk around town. So I don't, you know, I think we fearmonger a little bit over Peak One, and it's true. There are some kids that age up and they need cars or they get cars or whatever that benefit to them is, but I can point to several families that have gotten rid of cars because the neighborhood is designed well and it's located to safe walking routes and close to Main Street. So I think it goes both ways.
What it should be. Right? I'm having trouble with picturing all of the area that's included in this. This is a really different conversation in my head for West Main Street and south of town, whatever, I don't know what we call that area. But to impose these regulations on South or West Main is one thing. I think it's terrible to put them, to turn one, you know, everybody's living in a one house neighborhood. And all of a sudden, you're doing everything you can to impose upon them a magnitude of neighbor that they didn't buy into.
But there are neighbors there. I mean, that's a
Well,
trade-off, right? There's actually people living in those homes compared to like a fourplex market rate, also gigantic property where nobody lives there.
But you're taking, I understand, but you're taking, this is the challenge. This is why I'm viewing it as two different things. Is imposing one, we have different. Taking that, your neighbor's house, that under current code, the parking restrictions, the size and scale restrictions, your expectation of who will be your neighbor in perpetuity. And telling them we're gonna put 6 units there instead of 2 or 3. We're gonna allow cars on the street. We're gonna allow them to build that house much closer to your window than we otherwise would have. Because it's workforce. I think in the topic of creating better neighborhoods. Adding this much density, adding this much size and scale, adding this much overflow parking onto unexpected areas is challenge. But that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do on West Main where we have, or on Main Street where we have high density, high buildings, all the things that make Frisco's Main Street or that business core what it is. So that's my distinction.
No, it's great. I'm kind of going through this, looking through all these different pieces. I'm kind of like in my head being like, you don't have to choose all of them. You know what I mean? Like, really? No, we can be like, oh, I'm okay with this part. I'm just trying to. No, not that you need it, but you know what I mean? Like, that's how I'm like, I'm not looking at it all at once, like everything changed. You know what I mean?
We spend so much time arguing about how much we don't like the over living of short-term rental people. The whole problem in a community is they live larger, and now we're legislating to allow that level of live larger next door to the people who are sympathetic to from a short-term rental perspective.
Wait, I'm confused. Who's gonna live larger, the workforce?
Well, short-term,
or-
the problem I think we face in a community perspective is short-term rental occupants live larger. They come, they bring more people, they're on vacation, that's why we've done what we've done to bring more community.
Okay.
To restrict short-term rentals, to allow our community to develop without the overuse of the facilities. And now we're legislating 3 times more people.
But there are people that live here, they're not coming, no, and it's gonna be people that become part of your community. It could be the nurse in the ER, it could be, I'm just throwing that out there. They're not, these people would be people that are invested in our community and not just like, oh, I'm here for a week, I'll do what I want and live large.
But the difference is, in the one house that's there now as a short-term rental that they're living large, we're now gonna say, okay, tear down that house and build 6 units. Full of, that's what the code is allowing, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we're doing, is we're encouraging tear downs with multiples of density.
Is that
On that
really
property.
profitable for a developer to build? I'm just curious, like, you always look at this stuff and you're like, what could be bad about it? Tell me all the stuff that's bad, because that's. I appreciate it, you look at it that way, or I look at it that way, not you, but, you gotta like roll the stones over as many times as possible, not even like face the past. But, yeah, I don't know. It's like bittersweet, right? 'Cause you could have like this big building with 4 units of nobody living there, or we could have a different type of building. Either way, there's gonna be something there. It's just who do we want there? I mean, I don't mean to be kind of dry.
Boundary lines moved out? Do you want the roof line moved up? Do you want extra cars parked on the street? That's the decision I think we're facing.
I could go with the roof, but maybe not the cars. You know what I'm saying? I'm just throwing that out as an example. You could pick, like, I'm gonna go like it's a.
That's what we need to start doing.
Mhm.
So that non.
No, this is the discussion that needs, because there's seven different opinions, plus mine, plus developers, plus public, so.
Pick through, I mean, we started with parking and I've got it up, so I think we should keep it on that, and I think it's good, but I think. to my comfort, the on-street parking suggestion within the staff report is central core mixed use areas. So we're not talking about every neighborhood. If you go to the south end of town right now, I'd say half the time I park in town lot, like on the town right away in front of my house. Most people don't even realize where they're parking. Now isn't actually their property, it's town right away. So I think in the neighborhood spaces, this particular item I'm comfortable with because we're talking about the places where there is maintained paved streets and side streets in that central core mixed use district. And that to me makes total sense to meet some of these density standards where, right, like whether we like it or not, Main Street is getting busier. We're trying to get more housing on it. And you drive down Main Street at 10 o'clock at night and there's not a single car to be seen by our code. We've designed it that way. But we could have had more houses at the CDOT lot and more people living there had we been able to put 8 cars on an empty side street every night. So for me, that completely meets some of my goals of how do we get the right density in the right places, not based the design around parking, but based the design around people living in a high density area. And then we've solved the parking issue by putting their cars where we already have empty spots in the central core. So I'm good with that one.
Could I go back to the zoning map and just answer Andy's question there?
My screen too.
Okay, but
You're zooming a little while. That looked like easier.
all lots of housing could fit there, but all right, so on this map, this is the town of Frisco zoning map. Any of these areas that are pink, shown in pink here, are the mixed use zone districts. So that would be, we are sitting right here at Town Hall. That's the blue area here, post office, all the way out to the highway there. At the east end of town, the B1 lot in that area where the feral gas is, that's zoned mixed use as well. The central core is this gray area. It's essentially all the area between Highway 9, Madison, Galena, and Granite. It's in those areas there. RH is essentially this area here. That's this lighter shade of brown. So that would be the high density residential, which under current zoning or our zoning allows 16 units per acre in the RH zone district. Under the proposal that could double if it was 100% deed restricted. This yellow is the RL, which is the low density residential, which is 8 units per acre. The project that was mentioned, or the 2 projects that were mentioned earlier at the corner of Frisco and 2nd and Frisco and 3rd are located right here, which is residential high. And so that's why they are building to 5 units of that nature. If they're in RL, they wouldn't have been able to do 5 units on those properties. RM, there's not a ton of properties that are zoned RM. It's essentially this area here between Mountainside and Belford is zoned RM. Other areas, so the Gateway Zone District is located up here in this.
Wait, is RM also, that's the yellow on the, whatever that would be, the north side of town?
Yellow, this here?
Got a bunch of yellow over there.
Yeah, so these yellows here, those are all RH, residential high.
So subject to the proposed changes.
Correct. Although, however, with the caveat, like this area here, this is Frisco Park, that PUD, it was all set by density. So that is set. So that was all platted density. Essentially, it's going to apply to these platted town lots south of Granite Street, or I'm sorry, in this area here, both between essentially Galena and Mountainside. The center of town. Gateway Zone District, that's this orange area here right now. That's is primarily focused on tourist areas and tourist development. There is some density that's permitted with it. However, under the code, anything that's residential is a conditional use. So there is some other caveats that go with that. So those are the zone district that this applies to. That helps. Any questions on any of that? And I'll go back to the code text.
That's PUDs are set.
PUDs are set.
It's the whole town minus the units.
Which are all the hash marked.
And also peak one, because that's RN, which is residential neighborhood. So that's a different zone district as well. Also doesn't apply to, but it is high density. It doesn't apply to a lot of some other public uses. We didn't put it in light industrial either, so we did limit it in some ways. All right, back to the code text amendments. Parking, sorry, I interrupted, Mayor. Please continue.
I guess love to try to get some more direction on parking and keep the conversation going.
And so the point you made about developed parking is very important as well. We don't want this just parked in dirt right of ways, uncontrolled parking, whatever else to apply for that or to apply to a parking reduction. So that is where it does say that it would be subject to construction of any needed improvements. So as an example, you can go around various places in town, even in the central core there, where there is no curb, gutter, sidewalk, no parking developed. So those are areas where parking could be developed and a developer could take advantage of this.
Nobody's jumping in.
Yeah, I offered.
I don't mind being shy. I don't mind being not shy. A couple of questions. One is microtransit a transit stop? We're gonna go looking in the future.
I would say no. I would say it's a developed set transit route. And there's a word in here too that I added in and it says local transit. What is a local transit route? I would just, my own opinion is most of the Summit stage routes currently are not local transit. They are a regional transit service getting from A to B. It's not, local transit is a circulator getting various places. And we've had conversations about a Frisco Flyer or something like that. I would not necessarily consider, personally, I would not consider most of the Summit stage routes to be a local transit service.
So, and the part that I truly don't. Not comfortable with. They build 5 studios. That means they can do it with, I assume we round up, they would need 3 spaces.
Yes.
They have 5 cars. Where are they gonna park? And I don't know the answer, but if we're gonna look to the future, that's our present for sure.
Not everybody has cars. Not everybody has cars. You know, what I mean, like,
But I
she's
think
got
that's-
employees that don't have cars.
Most of my employees who would want to live in some type of place like this that we're envisioning. I mean, I think I have 2 people out of 12 that own cars. I've had multitudes of people that work there that praise the Summit stage. They were like, you guys got the best transportation. I mean, I know we're all in a different level of conversation about this. But the kids that work with me are pumped about the Summit stage. Nobody has a car. Just throwing this in there for some info, you know?
But what's the answer to the neighbor who says, yeah, but now they do. They do have 5 cars. In those 5 studios, because that's over the course of the town, maybe it is only 70, 60, 50% of studio occupants have cars. But all 5 of those do.
I keep thinking about like.
Where do
times
they
that I
go?
lived in the city, you know, like I've lived in a bunch of really big cities and. It's just nobody has cars and they have transportation.
This house.
I think, so I share that concern, Andy, but I think the answer to that is one, it will be very clear when they're going through the planning process that like, you are not gonna have parking for all the units you're proposing. Are you aware of that? Cause it's not gonna sneak up on them that they're building 6 units or what was your 5 units with
5,
3
6, or
parking
10,
spaces
whatever,
or however
yeah.
the math works. And that's an understanding of the person putting the money into develop it. But this goes back to, then we just need to start enforcing town code. We have plenty of parking requirements throughout town that the only place we do enforce is on Main Street. I remember when Callie, when she was a public service,
CSO.
CSO, community service officer, she put the ticket on my car, there was a warning, like, you're parking the public right away, just so you know, we were trying to enforce that. Right, and I think that's it, like we're not creating necessarily a huge new problem with this if we make sure we are happy with what our parking standards are throughout the town and then enforce those. Right, and that might take a huge wholesale shift on the police department side, but that comes from us, not them. But do we like our parking code right now? I think it's great. I think it works. If we enforce it or we don't need to enforce it most of the time, so it's not an issue. If we have this, right, like I would much rather have 20 more workforce units and enforce our parking code as is than not have 20 workforce units and just say,
See, but I also want to speak for these new occupants who now have moved in
but
and
that's,
have no place to
but
park.
that's something, when you're coming to sign a lease, you make a bunch of assumption or decisions upon where you're living based on your lifestyle and what you can do. And if you're so dependent on your car, it's not gonna be the right place for you.
But if it's 5 condos,
It's still not the right place for you if you can't bring your car with you. That would be my take. That would, you know,
I just dog up here, you can't rent if you have a dog. It's a barrier, but you choose not to rent a place where you can't have a dog. Like I know that's a really basic, like simplified version of this, and having lots of dogs in town does not equate to lots of cars on the street, but you have to make decisions based on what's available and what the rules are and what's enforceable, and we cannot keep planning developments for parking spaces. This is a community of people, and some people have cars, some people don't have cars. But if we continue to value the cars and drive up the cost of housing just so we can park them, we are missing the boat on the people. And we have to try this. And the way that this is written, proximity to transit within 1/4 mile of, Don, you said regional, but that's not what this says. But it basically means if you take that interpretation, that there's nowhere in town where you could actually do this, because we don't have a local transit. So I think it's well worth trying for workforce housing on the parking side. You know, I see where all these other things certainly benefit, but can understand how it can change community character. But this is the place where we can reduce parking. And it's for people like Liz's employees and the people that we want living here who don't rely on cars, need cars, have cars, or they've just figured out a way to not do it.
I mean, when I was driving not have car. And I lived in the Galena Street, the Continental Divide. I mean, granted, the Summit Stage was right in front of the Snowshoe Motel, but I didn't have a car for years, you know? And then when I did have one, I didn't drive it, you know, just because I always just took the bus to Concord, and I never had to drive. I don't know, I don't want to say we're overthinking it, you know, I don't want to, but you know, it's like where I'm staying right now on Third, there's that construction going on. And it is like driving through a gauntlet, there's like 40 cars someday, every single day at this one construction site. And it's dangerous, they're like walking around and you're just like, oh. Like and I always forget, you know, you start down the street, and you're like, should have took the other way, but whatever. Point is like, construction places are, there's like, I mean, maybe they should start code, you know, I don't know.
and just from go ahead.
Yeah, you know. Just like the city, if you choose to have a car, you're on your own. Go find a place to put
And
your
you
car.
have to pay
Right?
extra.
And you pay for a lot or whatever, or you move it around every day, and they all do it. People do it all the time, millions of people, you know, and just because we're here and we're more spread out, and we're all used to having cars and using our cars, that's the way we're gonna live. So, you know, to give this good real estate to the vehicles, because there's gonna be a requirement otherwise, like, that makes zero sense. If you are willing to get into a place that has no parking space, well, then you know what? You're gonna figure out what to do your car. You know what? You might park it at Copper Mountain because you work there. You might park it, who knows? And if we do our due diligence and we work on our transit plan and all, then we will provide a parking structure or something for the overflow in the town for these people to go to. You know, this is where it's like, we have to answer all these questions. We cannot plan this based off of everybody's gonna have a car and that's just the way it is. I mean, I'm sorry, I disagree, and I know some architects are on your page. you know, with you. But I can also tell you, it's the same thing as these residential areas, as you're saying, well, now we're gonna have 6 units and everything else. Everybody I know that lives in residential zones are like, build workforce housing. Build it next door to my place. I don't care, right? In your backyard, we're not gonna do that. In my backyard, we're not gonna do that, because I'm in a PUD as well, right? So we just can't do that. So this is very pointed at a few residential areas, you know, that we're talking about here, you know, like we gotta get beyond this, because there's a number of zoned areas that aren't even gonna be affected remotely here. And so it's like, this is what we have to do. We have to provide housing. We don't have to provide parking necessarily, but we should, in which case we should provide off-site housing. Right.
For the government, we don't have to provide housing. We provide the regulations that allow for housing to be created.
Yes.
So one of the
But
other alternatives,
if we
what
don't-
would be the thought if we reduce the size of the legal parking space by 1/3? So now all of a sudden you can't have a Yukon, but you have to have a relatively small, you know. I drive a RAV4. You want to drive a Yukon, you got to park it somewhere else. You want to drive a RAV4, giving it a 4-wheel drive opportunity.
We're gonna door ding every one of our vehicles.
But that is that on the table. You know, they do it in shopping centers all the time
Yeah,
and it
compact
screws it up completely. But, but it's a way around the parking regulations, is make the parking spaces smaller. And you move into that apartment building, you better be damn sure you don't have a Yukon, because it doesn't fit. I don't know, but it's the same, it's.
Let's take 10, let's grab dinner, we'll keep talking through eating. Got it. So 10 minutes, grab some food. We can do like a chat about this. I get it.
Grabbing the food. Yeah.
No, you gotta, no food if you don't keep talking about this. I can't wait to see what you're going to do. We all have to read our fortune cookies for the record.
Yes, sir.
Local transit
I
and
thought that
the
might get some-
micro transit not qualifying for each other. Sounds like it's in complete conflict.
I said actually local, it would have to be within that distance of a local transit stop. And so that means something that would be, and Breck Free Ride has local transit stops because they go into neighborhoods. And I think that's kind of the key there. Most, our transit doesn't go into neighborhoods right now.
No. If we
Goes down Main
create-
Street.
To Angie's plan, right? If we were to create, right, this could cost us a lot of money.
So I think the challenge with micro transit and right now it's a concept and it could work great. Good. There's no designated stop. And so that's where,
Well, in my mind, there is.
well, but if that's the case though, that would, if we had a micro transit system, every single property would qualify for this reduction because every property would be within a quarter mile of a transit stop at that point.
And I guess we're, right, I didn't realize that's where micro transit went.
They can pick you up
It just
anywhere.
took you where, see, that's not in my mind.
Mhm.
As an example, our micro transit would only stop, as an example, Summit stage stops.
That would be an end destination, but it could start any number of places as well. So yeah, the micro transit.
It's a transit center.
And there's no designated spots where they pick up as a micro transit. They could, because it's a car, it's like Uber. They're on demand. And
Oh,
they
see,
get-
that's not the micro, that's not what I'm envisioning at all.
Okay, yes, the micro transit as it's set up, it's pretty much on demand. You tap into the app and say, I want to go here. Their program decides, okay, I got a rider that wants here, and here. We're gonna pick them all up here this time because that's the closest to all of them. The next time that these 3 people want to pick up, they may say, oh, we're gonna pick up over here at the corner of 3rd and Frisco rather than 2nd and Frisco.
If I'm here and we go down that road,
Mhm.
that's not gonna be the model.
But that is the typical micro transit.
And I educated you. Thank you. But that's,
Which honestly, I had never heard the word micro transit until April. So everything I'm doing is learning about micro transit. I am
I
not
will-
familiar with it
I
at
call
all.
it a transportation circulator, transportation, with set stops, set times.
Yes, that's the Frisco Flyer model or something like that.
That's me.
That's a smaller vehicle transit than our current transit, but it's not the typical micro transit model.
No, yeah, it's whatever.
Because that's on a fixed route. That's a fixed route circulator is
Back
what,
to the transit center, and from there you get on the bus to go wherever.
that would be local transit. That's a fixed route circulator. That, it's all terminology.
It is semantics, it is,
Yeah.
I learned. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I'm learning every day. Right? I want to be learning every day.
Something today, I told the guy I was talking, I said, this is gonna be the most important thing I learned today. Oh, and I do now remember. Well,
Hey, 2 out of 2.
This was cool, but not as much.
Somebody asked for a chart of the boat planes. I'm pulling that up for you.
Great. Who asked for that?
Hunter. So there you go. That's a boat plane.
That's both plane.
You can explain how it's measured. There you go.
Who is that?
Hunter.
Hunter did, okay. Cool.
I wasn't even planning to stay at all.
Ah. Good topic. Hey, that's progress. We gotta take baby steps where we get them.
So I don't know if you can share screens. when-
I can, yeah.
when you get back.
Is the other stuff still on there?
Yeah, just minimize. And your staff report.
Good. Running man.
Where's your staff report?
Staff report.
PDF.
Cool, thank you.
In these neighborhoods in my way. Like, if you're living large. Very important. I would rather see that be 8 units. And you have them walking and spending money, like, so. If I get kind of stick to an 8 or forever. unit today.
So you're gonna. No, so this. It's just. Very soon. You're good to go. So.
The materials, like going down the tube to make it cheaper, like I think that those are the kinds of things that make the neighborhood creative. And allow for a little bit more space.
They were doing the innovative stuff.
Yeah. Right. Well, no, too bad, like. Oh, Richard. Usually I do. Yeah. I didn't put that afterwards. Not really, I'm not even required. Yeah. I'm glad we do, and I think it's beneficial for everyone. I think all the other. It's.
Where are they? But I mean, come on. You did you not say, you set yourself up for that? Cool. Are you gonna drive to the store to get it?
No, yeah, sure.
Cool, okay. Do what?
I'm gonna file a hurt feelings report.
Okay. I mean, parking is just one of those things. It's how do we, it's not a one meeting discussion.
Hunter was a kid.
It's not.
But I mean, I feel like our founding fathers.
In hindsight, then I didn't think it was a big deal, like,
Driving it
I
is
was like, dude,
terrifying.
that car was a little
But-
close.
Just seems.
There'd be a whole parade of like elementary school kids riding their bikes across the damn road, 2 cars would pass, and they'd be like up against the guardrails. There was, and it was rock straight down to the water. There was no bench or anything. They had to build that.
You ever turn like,
Conversation going. Ideally, I think. I'd love just as Don has pointed out, this is the start of a much more in-depth process with planning commission. And I think. Equal to the importance of having a recommendation and a starting point to planning commission is. There'll need to be, in my opinion, a very thorough public input period and conversations and meetings around these because there's a lot here. But I'd love just to jump in with the time we have left. If there's anything people have serious heartburn about, really want to talk about before we give Don direction as to what to bring back to planning commission for kind of the start of the next round of conversation. And this is by no means the last work session we'll have on this. I don't think we're far enough along in this conversation to feel good about that.
I wanted to see a visual of bulk plane, and I think somebody was able to grab that.
This screen share. Sorry.
Don, while that's getting pulled up, if you have between 50% and 100% workforce housing, that project qualifies at the 50% level.
Correct. If you're at 98%, you're at the 50% level, at least the way it's written. You're trying to scale it or proportionality or anything like that. That's not how it's written. It's choose your own adventure.
Okay, so the lines that are drawn are the bulk plane, and when you talk about bulk plane encroachment in terms of square footage, right?
Footage.
Cubic footage.
Yep.
You're talking about anything that would exceed that.
And there's, I've probably got a good graphic from a project that went through, but yeah, essentially, so this is a compliant bulk plane because it does not show any encroachments. If this dormer came, or this gable came further out, it would encroach in the bulk plane and it would be this weird pyramid shape that's sitting on top of this outer envelope out here. And that could be allowed up to 350 cubic feet as is right now.
And so I'm just trying to understand scale visually. So 350 feet, would that be like one of those little gables or like?
Yeah, 350 cubic feet would be, let's say, 10 by 10 by 10 would be 1,000 cubic feet. So think about something that's a cube that's 10 by 10 by 10 feet. That would be 1,000. So
But it could also
it's
be
not
any
a lot.
combination of that, right? Like it could be 10 cubic feet there, 10 cubic feet there.
And that's typically what we'll see. Is we'll see a little bit of an encroachment here, another one over here. The example that was talked about earlier at Second and Frisco, that one had, I think there's 5 individual buildings in there, and there was a total of somewhere in the ballpark of 200 cubic feet of bulk plane encroachment spread across those 5 buildings. And it's typically just a roof line that doesn't fit for whatever reason.
And so from like a design perspective, you know, I asked the question, does 4 feet in roof height really get you anything? I mean, to ask the same question, does 500 really get you anything? Or is it just like kind of hard to fit in on this lot line? Or like, I just don't get it.
Like at this point, every architect pushes that limit as much as they can. Correct, for the most part.
Yeah, and
But are they pushing that in workforce units or are they pushing that because they can sell it to the next higher? income.
Whatever fits in and whatever they'll get cleared on, because they can maximize the use of all of their space, right? And
it did happen. We ran into the bulk plane at the Granite Park project and trying to fit there. There's step back requirements. So we with Granite Park, we met all these code requirements. Because it as the town, I feel it's our responsibility to comply with the same code that everybody else has to comply
So
with.
if we had 500 square feet or cubic feet of bulk plane encroachment on that project, how many more units could we have done?
That we would have gotten more units, but I think as Andy pointed out, there might have been some efficiencies in building. We might have gotten one more studio if we were able to squeeze up on the west building because of the setback. I'm sorry, step back.
I gotta also say, on the other side of the stick, if you talk to a bunch of architects around here, bulk plane is why we have some kind of funny looking buildings.
Mhm.
You know, we are
Also true.
hindered by bulk plane at this point. And, you know, one of the things that I was just talking about was, if you have 4 feet here or a couple hundred cubic feet there, depending on the design, you know, you might be able to squeeze things in a little differently than you would have. Right? And it would give you theoretically more benefit, you know, in building and or in square footage and or.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I don't know, the hindering is maybe not a word. So the reasons, at least with a market rate development, like where you're putting 5 units onto one of these town lots or a set of town lots. These are very large units and they are, the architects and the developers are attempting to maximize the floor area and the square footage that they can do that. I mean, so they can get 3,500 square foot units or some very large units. And that's why they have bulk plan encroachments. If they built 2,000 square foot units, they wouldn't have necessarily bulk plan encroachments. So yes and no.
And so we're maximizing density. We will need to encroach, you know, somewhere to get more.
The reason I'm asking this line of questioning is just like, okay, at 500 cubic feet to your neighbor might look huge in the bulk plane, cause, you know, whatever neighborly issues, but do you actually get density or functionality out of that? Or are you just maximizing market rate floor space? That's what is there actually a benefit to that?
And again, as I think certainly the architects in the room might be able to respond a little bit better and have some maybe real world examples of that. I think, yes, you won't necessarily, you might get more units, especially on a larger property and a larger project, on a quarter acre property, probably not, but on a larger property, maybe. You probably will gain some efficiencies in building. And I think with a workforce housing project, that might be the biggest key.
That's really helpful to see.
You know, these are all and not more than what every developer's been asking for to work into affordable housing since we started with that. Meeting with development. You know, these are all the items right down the list. And you know, this is a little more applicable because we're talking 50 to 100% workforce housing. You know, so that's another delineation there. You know, you're still not going to be able to knock down that house and build 4 units and use all of these bonuses, right? Because you're not providing 50% workforce housing.
Right, and that, I was thinking that in the back of my head too, related, like not every developer, is after affordable housing. Or does it make sense? And not every single project is gonna end up at 150% total units. They're not gonna take advantage of this necessarily, so it's not, I think we're thinking in our heads that every property for redevelopment is gonna do this, and that's not the reality at all.
Want to. If you design the program to make it work, that the highest and best, most profitable use of land is to take advantage of this program, then it will. That's what will happen because that's the market playing by the rules that we've set. So what's the goal? Is it to do a few? Is it to do a lot? Because if you make this too sweet, a lot's gonna happen.
So I don't think there's any way to make this as sweet as building a McMansion and maximizing your 3,500 square foot home selling for market value compared to building any workforce housing, period. And that's my belief. So, you know, if you're gonna make your money off of a market value place.
We're wasting our time.
No.
With one clarification, I think certainly the town would probably utilize this program in the RL and RH zone districts. Because right now, we're limited by the same density as everybody else is in those areas, and we do own some properties that the town could utilize this program for. And I did write this with that in mind.
I would love to hear from from some of the, run some numbers.
Mhm.
Is this who likes this? You know, and I don't know if, meaning. For me, what would I love to know is, what should we expect as far as usage of this? Are we now designing a code encouraging tear downs? Is that what we want? And if it's not, is this going to have any impact?
I would say our current code encourages tear downs. And that's what we've seen. Every development that we've seen at planning commission since I've been here, the past 3 years, almost 3 years exactly, has been a tear down of a prior existing single family unit and redeveloping it to the maximum and maximizing that bulk envelope for market rate housing. That has been what our code encourages.
Then let's talk through with a deeper dive of what will be the impact of this. What are the economics?
I think what it does, almost, I don't think there's a way that you could actually make a workforce housing project pencil out in Frisco without some sort of additional revenue from some other opportunity that a market developer is not going to have the advantage of.
So do you think when this is done, still gonna have to entertain requests from developers for government subsidies to make the project work?
For a workforce housing project, yes, unless the AMI is significantly higher than it is right now. And building prices come down and the cost of land, which is probably the single biggest factor right now, comes down. And I don't foresee that happening.
We're doing all this so our subsidies can be lower. Yes. We can't get to market neutral.
And I would also say maybe so our cost per unit of the properties that are projects that we developed goes down as well.
And I'll be done with just the thought of, to me, it's, what should we expect utilization of this to be? And that would be determined by the economics.
Mhm.
And the other is, let's discuss the impact on the existing community as it goes into play. We can hope, and I will hope with you, that not every unit will be occupied by a worker with a car.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the hope. What are we doing to the community if that's not the reality? And I think in today's world, in a lot of cases, not every case, but a lot of cases, that would be our reality, is too many cars in the place. How do we manage that situation? Because it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $10 question, $1 million question.
I'll pay 20 for the.
All right.
I don't know. But that's what we gotta figure out.
No, I could give you some answers.
Community deserves that answer
Yeah.
when they ask the question.
So there's a couple of things. First of all, we'd have to establish some things that we don't currently have, such as a permit system for overnight parking in these areas adjacent to the development, just as a starter on that. Mentioned potentially developing a parking structure. Well, and that sounds great, but parking structures are not cheap to build or maintain, and end up being both of those. Yeah, so I would not put that forth as a huge part of the solution myself. I mean, frankly, I was just mentioning earlier, if we can reduce all that we want, we can reduce all over the place, but unless there's a behavioral change and infrastructure in place to support that, you're not going to achieve your goals. If you reduce parking and don't have transit or other opportunities for people to move around, all you've done is create and move your parking problem somewhere else. So that's not necessarily the solution that you want to go for, in my opinion.
So I know one of your questions is, I mean, when the council, whenever they adopted the first density bonus, I mean, I don't think you ever will know implementation or the finances of it. You're just trying to give another option within the code for someone to utilize the lots they have, given whatever their goals are. Like, I don't think we're trying to dictate. We're taking a bunch of the feedback we've had over the last 2 years from a bunch of developers saying, would have done this, could have done this, your density bonus didn't fit. It aged out. So we looked at that and we're realizing our density bonus is no longer relevant to the market that we have. This is what we're attempting to bring it up to date. And I think this is, I'll be really curious when planning commission chews on this as well, but I think who knows? I would be radical enough to say I would love different code amendments that more attack the problem we have now, which means if you scrape something, you have to build that's like a workforce housing unit. Inclusionary zoning, like, sorry, you don't get to build 10,000 square feet for somebody who's never gonna live in it, but I know that probably will never come to fruition. So this is one of those places where we can try to get it. And on the car thing, not to go back to the car thing, because Don, I know there was a lot more in your report than just parking. That's market, right? The market's gonna sort that out. Those units aren't gonna be as expensive, and we're probably gonna have one of the most solid workforces in the county when we have all these units and people are like, I can live in this house, condo, apartment, ADU, whatever it is. I don't have to have a car. My rent is gonna be this much lower because it doesn't come with a parking spot. Because I can walk to any of the businesses in Frisco and have a job there. Like,
Let's see how it works. I just,
we don't know.
no, what I mean is, what's the structure we're setting? If we're gonna limit parking, how do we, and I don't even like to say enforce, but how do we create the guarantee? Because we're plugging this process into an existing community. We're not building from scratch.
Yep.
How do we protect the existing community from the failure of the occupants to comply with the intent of the code? And I don't know what that looks like. That's what I hope. Because I don't want it to be, I like the density. I like a lot of this. I don't like what it might do to an existing neighborhood, and I just want to understand.
And I will say, I mean, that is a valid concern that we have seen. We have our own housing project where we've received complaints because there's more cars than the parking spaces that are there. And so that is a continual problem that we continue to work with. And we ask our tenants when they move in, hey, do you have a car? Well, some of them got cars after they moved in. So now we've actually had to go and develop parking passes for our own employee housing units so that we have a limit on the number of cars. And if they're parking on the street with the parking pass, I'm sorry, that's not necessarily a permitted thing. So it has changed how we're operating our own employee housing units.
So. Yep,
So Don,
quick, and then we're gonna
I'm
wrap
just
up
gonna
and we'll
ask
figure out
for-
next steps with Don.
have we kept a track, a log, a list of the asks for say the last 18 months, 3 years from the developers, and that's where I'm gonna land. And through the meetings that we've had with folks in just the last 6 months. Presume, and I'm just gonna come right to it. Is this that list?
Not entirely. So, I mean, we have heard from some developers, they wanted the higher AMIs, and we had that density bonus discussion and did not resolve that. And frankly, I don't know that this is the time or place to do that, because that's kind of a different conversation. That's trying to fit density into a market rate development and encourage developers to do that. Have we addressed inclusionary zoning in this, which Andy and Mayor Warrenson just both mentioned? No, they haven't. There's a number of other things that could occur. This covers most of the development code related things other than the AMI and density bonus and inclusionary zoning.
Now I'm just gonna figure out best next steps for and then I'll go for planning commission. Do you want to bring this to them and chew on it and we can do another work session? And leave their feedback in, or do you want more time for us to go through what we didn't get to this evening before you bring this back to planning commission?
I guess a couple of things. First of all, I mean, I'm one of the challenges in something like this in a short time frame. There's a lot of conversation. I don't know that there was, I think there was certainly some, at least consensus on a few of the items. Parking is out there still a little bit on what to do with that. I don't think there was huge, I'm just running through it here. I don't think there was a ton of opposition or concern about the density bonuses themselves, about the lot coverage. I don't think there was a ton of concern about relaxing that a little bit. I don't think there's a ton of concern about setbacks. Maximum building height, there was conversation. I didn't really feel that there was a lot of concern with that. It might be a usable incentive. We didn't really get into the development standards, and I think that's, I mean, honestly, that's one of the bigger visible changes that you'll see after a project is developed, other than potentially parking. But that is a potential visible change that's going to be there for the life of the project. And so that needs some more conversation. If you have any initial thoughts on that, whether we want to hold, I guess, big question, do we want to hold workforce housing developments to our development standards as a whole, so that a workforce development has the same appearance as a market rate development as far as meeting the code? That's maybe the first question there. If there's consensus that no, maybe we can relax those, then we can move that forward. But the answering that question first is maybe pretty important.
You're pretty much just spending town money at that point, right?
I'm sorry?
If adding design standards is gonna add $50,000 to the construction, and they're coming to us anyway for a subsidy dollar. If we relax the design standards, then theoretically, the subsidies would be lower.
Correct. That's certainly a potential outcome.
I think we need more, I'd like more time to have thorough conversation on that. I think we need to have follow up on the height. I think we need a little more. And I have some more questions we just didn't get to, so I think, yeah, I think we'll definitely get more work session time on this. It's more. Do you want to bring like the parking and those first few that you mentioned back to planning commission just to see where they are, and then we'll
Sure.
keep killing on the parts we didn't get to?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to do that. And this could be a multiple iteration of going to council and then back to work session. Theoretically, we could have a joint work session. I guess maybe the concern with that is ultimately they are giving a recommendation to town or to town council on that. And I would want to respect that process as well. I mean, in a joint work session, they could feel directed by town council. And I would want to respect that and protect against that.
Like the area where else it's bigger public open house type thing with all of us present, so we can all hear that. And make less.
I think, us hammering out some of these things that we're not sure of, because partially we don't understand them, give it to planning commission and see where they fall on holes. And like, does all of this fit in? Because I'm telling you, all of this fits in, right? And all of this fits in without enough. And we're like arguing that, we're gonna make some of these changes that are gonna hurt, a couple of particular neighbors or something. We were gonna go back out to the people after planning commission, correct, in some fashion, to get input. This is my understanding of the process.
The public would be invited to the planning commission meeting to give public comment and participate in that, at least as the typical process is set up. We certainly could do a more robust process or open house or whatever else is as mentioned there, but that's not the typical.
I think us going around in circles about like, well, is 500, cubic feet in the bulk plane gonna make such a difference? We shouldn't be asking these questions. Maybe the questions are more based off of, is every neighbor gonna be bent out of shape that you've got 500 square cubic feet out of your bulk plane? But like, it's also that you are in control of your property, control of all the other properties around you. And especially as we're getting closer to build out and everybody's gonna keep knocking stuff down. And the bottom line is the market calls for knocking down old houses, building McMansions, and that's it. Whatever we do right now is not gonna like force a bunch of workforce housing. Inclusionary zoning might, and that's where I also intend on taking this conversation. But like getting stuck in some of these little particulars, I feel like the planning commission could easily cover most of that. And it would be covered in, is this reasonable? Is this reasonable from a real estate agent or from an architect or from a, you know, or from a career planner or from a, you know, that's the bottom line. So that's where I'm at. I don't think I even need to talk anymore. You can take that where.
You just mentioned
The handful of things that this does not cover, I'd be curious from the planning commission, what are we missing? What else are we missing as well?
Any,
We can chat about the next steps.
what I suggested, taking it to the next available planning commission meeting, at least for them to have it as a work session, not necessarily they're hearing for recommendation. Let them chew on it a little bit and then give you some feedback on where they were.
We are ultimately responsible for it. So.
Yep.
Never mind, go ahead with all.
This is your day to call the shots, so you should.
Well, then I think the rest of us can leave. Next up this evening, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Frisco Town Council. At this time, we'll open it up to public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment this evening on anything that's not on tonight's agenda may do so now. Please just state your name for the record, be topic specific, and keep your comments no longer than 3 minutes. If you're online, you can unmute. I'll call on you. And Chambers. Like anybody's raising their hand online.
I'm pressing buttons.
All right, Brett, get going. All right. Seeing no comments online, I will close public comment. Item number 2. We could do council comments. Would you like to? Go for it. Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Sure.
Moving this stuff, it's been years in the making, and, you know, we have collectively been working on all this stuff, and for us to, you know, to be moving forward on it, it has taken, you know, Don's creativity and ability and all in order to get here. So, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Andy, 'cause you reminded me also, Tom and I received a letter from a handful of the residents of Peak One neighborhood discussing, knowing that we we're doing a pretty in-depth housing conversation this evening, on deed restrictions, and some of the options that are within that particular neighborhood. I just wanted to make sure Tom will forward that letter around to the rest of council, because I don't think you were included on it. And I don't think we're in the deed restriction portion of this because we're still on the code side, but I think it's a conversation that we do need to have. And so we will bring that back as kind of a deed restriction review, and bigger conversation around that. So
Hang out to all of you right now.
I wanted to recognize that letter we did get, signed by a fair amount of the folks living over there. Any other comments? And item number 2, Rick? Go for it.
Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pertinent to Colorado Revised Statute CRS Section 24-6-402 (4) concerning the potential purchase of certain real property by the town and the potential sale of other real property owned by the town, and pertinent to CRS sections 24-6-402 (4) (e) to determine positions relevant to matters that may be subject to negotiations, to develop strategies for negotiations, and to instruct negotiators, each in connection with the potential construction of affordable housing projects on the real property that may be purchased and the real property that may be sold.
Moved to enter into executive session by Representative Incan. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Burley. Any discussion on the motion? Call the question, please.
Aronson,
Yes.
Burley,
Yes.
Held, Palenko. Absent, Incan,
Yes.
Mortensen,
Yes.
Scripcheck, Adrian.
Yes.
We'll move into executive session. We need a few minutes to switch over the